This is the second talk of day 2 of Haystack Conference. I'm here to introduce Tom Burgmans. Tom came all the way from Dale in the Netherlands to give this talk. And Tom's been working at Wolters Kluwer for about 11 years now. I had the pleasure of working with Tom for several years at WK, where we were fighting the good fight for search relevance inside a really big organization. Tom is continuing that fight, and he's going to tell you more about it. Welcome.
Thank you. All right. So I'm Tom Burgmans. I'm a search engineer, search specialist, working for Wolters Kluwer. Wolters Kluwer is a publisher in the areas of tax, legal, regulatory, healthcare, risk compliance. And it sells knowledge, and it sells knowledge in forms of, in most cases, in forms of dozens of online products. Right, and in those online products, search plays a central role. And my task so far, for the last 10 years, is to focus on the quality of those search products. So I guess that makes me a relevancy engineer. And so I'm feeling very at home here, actually, at this conference here, because it's all about what I'm doing in my daily job. And yeah, so that's what I'm going to talk about. So, and I felt that I need to have a presentation, do something. So I could pick a technical topic. I choose a bit different thing, which is talking about, okay, what does it actually mean in order to establish a culture in an organization like this, right? It doesn't happen overnight. So it takes a slightly different approach in telling a story here. And also the size matters because there's not just one product, we have dozens of them. So how does that work? If you have to support for each of them individually, support the optimizing relevancy. Because every product is different. There are different languages, different customers, different domains, different budgets. So, and how do you keep on managing that? So that's what I'm going to do. Let me start with telling you a story. Once upon a time, long ago, we had a search engine which is called Fast ESP. There was a commercial search engine. It was live and basically untuned. So we have title boosted a bit more than the body field, but that was about it. And customers were not really thrilled about that. So they became increasingly more unhappy with this situation. So something needed to happen. And Fast was a black box, so we didn't even know how to treat that. And this closed source, Microsoft didn't really want to provide us any insights on how the algorithm works because they consider that secret sauce. There was not good literature available in order to handle a problem like relevancy. So what do? There was no community, so there was no Fast community that we could reach out to ask, how can you solve a relevancy problem, let alone any conferences about relevancy. So what do you do if you have no help available and you are facing with a relevancy problem? Then you make all possible mistakes, right? That's what we did. So for example, limited budget. So after all, relevancy is just a bug that needs to be fixed, right? Sounds logical. No, it is not. Someone came with a good idea to just create a script that fixes relevancy. Just push the button and then magically everything is going to be fixed. So that would be nice. Doesn't really work out either. So it's almost like, if you now think back, that was actually a first attempt to apply a machine learning approach in order to solve relevancy, but then without doing all the groundwork that actually is needed before you can do even such a step. As if you put a cherry on a cake that hasn't been baked yet. So it's a search problem, so the search engineer is able to fix it. He is the magician, he knows how everything works, so let him fix it, right? It's not our concern. That's also one more mistake. And little time, and in the end, it's just something that needs to be fixed. Once we're done with that, then we can finally go on with our normal work. And we played a decent amount of whack-a-mole game too. So we fix a problem here, we introduce one there, and then you didn't get any far. So all the mistakes aside, we learned our lesson the hard way, and after some time, we finally got the hang of it, and we basically were able to decompose or reverse engineer the FAST scoring algorithm. So FAST did produce some logging information. It's not perfect, but at least it's a bit cryptic. We could find out how the algorithm works with a lot of effort. So it's way better than other commercial search engines that I've seen, although it's nothing compared to Explain. But anyway, we could figure it somehow out. And we also learned that tuning is a group effort. You cannot do it alone. You know, not the best guru is not even able to do this on his own. So you have to do it with a large set of people in the organization. It's both an art and a science at the same time in order to optimize relevancy. But after all, it is actually just hard, less elevated hard work in the end. And we figured out a methodology in order to do this in a systematical way. And that really worked. So in the end, we were able to produce better quality and provable, better customer satisfaction. So is this a happy end? Actually not. It's a story that doesn't end. So it keeps on continuing. It still happens on this very day. Okay, so this is a relevancy conference. So, and if you think about the term relevancy, you can have different definitions on that. So the narrow definition is relevancy is making sure everything matches correctly and only those documents that are necessary for the query, and then make sure that everything ranks in the correct order. That's the narrow definition, right? So those are the 2 points above. When I talk about relevancy, I'll like to think more about all those other things on the screen. So improving the complete search experience. So what does it take in order to get search to better, higher level? So that's why I also like to talk about improving search quality rather than tuning relevancy, because sometimes people think about that's just, okay, make sure that the algorithm works in a certain way. But that's not just the whole story. There's more that makes the product more valuable. So yeah, so let me tell you a secret that I just tell you. It is indeed, if you have better quality, then that means your product is more valuable. Now that is kicking in the most open door possible here, especially for this audience. But that starts when you want to introduce a culture in your organization, then you have to be sure that everyone is aware that better quality of search means more money. Right? That's where it starts. So that's how you get people on board. Now, how much more? That is kind of the golden question here, and that is difficult to answer. But it's a reasonable question. So if a group wants to be involved in relevancy, they want to know how much do I need to invest and what do I get back for that. I think the best way to answer that is to look at, if possible, at examples that are around, like other products where it already has been done for, and ask them what their experiences are. Although even then it's difficult in order to connect directly the product value to all the effort that we put in tuning. Maybe a bit of a better metric is to look at customer satisfaction, which is kind of related. So just look at the correlation between all the effort that we do for tuning versus how happy the customer would be. And there are metrics in order to find that. We already talked about it in other presentations. So it's one of those things that we look at is the click rate, or the inverse of the abandonment rate, like how many times does a user click on a page, on a result, which is kind of an indication that he is satisfied with that result page. You can argue about that, because sometimes he clicks on it, he's not happy and goes away quickly, but it is a very rough metric that we use. Okay, so what do we tune? There are kind of 4 different spaces where tuning actually happens, right? In the broad interpretation of what tuning means. So, of course, the search algorithm, there's a lot you can tune there, a lot of parameters. A larger place where tuning actually happens is inside the content. So the more consistent the content is, the better quality the content is, the better search will be in the end. The third part is the vocabularies. So those are, let's say, dictionaries. Thesaurus is an example of that are mainly used to enrich the document and enrich the query, but also for spell checking, for autocomplete. It's a separate domain, actually, and there are full-time jobs in our organization just to manage that. And the last place where I still see this as tuning is actually product development. It's building features on top of the product that are there to improve search. And that's kind of a broad definition, but that's actually something that we do quite a lot in the umbrella of what tuning means. So that's the tech cloud on the right is, if you break down our daily work, then that's basically what happens. It looks pretty much like a normal project almost. So if you look at the bottom, how much we actually do on really tuning the algorithm, it's very little. Well, in the first place, if you think about relevancy tuning, you think about that, but that's a very small piece of what the actual work that we do. Okay, so how to establish a culture? Well, I already said you have to have that awareness that value is money. Better quality means a better value for the product. When we onboard a new product that wants to get involved in relevancy tuning, what we do is tell them exactly how it works. So to build confidence, it is good to have a plan available and to tell them exactly this is what you can expect, this is what is going to happen. And roughly you can divide those steps in three areas. So the first step is setting everything up in order to get ready for tuning. And that is something that could take a long time. So I have examples where it took more than a year to get everything set up. And those are typically projects that are starting from scratch or do a heavy migration process. And setting that up doesn't mean that we are slow. It just means that we want to be involved as early as possible in a new project for the purpose of making search better. So it doesn't mean that we are actually tuning them. We are just getting involved in a very early stage. At that point, you can still have influence on the actual architecture of a solution, and also about how the content should be structured. Right? And a mistake that I've seen happening is that a product is being starting up. They don't care about tuning, but the last 1 or 2 months are actually reserved for optimizing relevance. And at that stage, it's actually too late. There's very little you can do at that point. So you can maybe tweak the algorithm a little bit here and there, but designs already have been defined. Content, nothing is going to change there a lot. So then I would say that's not the best advice. So setting up, more about that later, but that is like one of the most important steps actually. So then number 2 is the full operation mode. That's the time that we are actually going to run those judgment sets that we have and then going to test relevancy and do the analysis. And a lot of times this is also the moment that the product is already live at that point, which is also beneficial because then you can also measure at the same time customer satisfaction and how they react to any tuning efforts. And at some point, if you have a situation that relevance is relatively okay and it's going fine, then a project could drop a bit back to what I call maintenance mode. And that means that actually that stage is more about make sure that regression doesn't happen. Just to keep up the level of the tuning that we have achieved at that point. And it could be very well that at some time it is necessary to go back to full operation mode. And that's that's a circle that keeps on happening. So that's one other way of saying that the story never ends. Okay, so let's set up everything. So what do we need? We need a product that has some level of maturity. It means that basically everything has to be there. The content has to be in a stable mode already. It doesn't have to be production ready yet, but at least good enough for us to do the first rounds of relevancy tuning. We need to have a team. The stakeholders of those team are someone that stays awake the most if search is going bad. So that is the boss or the product owner. We need to have someone that understands the content most. We need to have someone that understands the search engine, and we need to have someone, multiple of them, hopefully, that understands what the user needs. Right, so the domain experts. So I put multiple there because they tend to disagree with each other. So it's good to have a bit of a balance about different influences of what domain experts expect. So that's the bare minimum, but I would suggest to have this team a bit bigger, at least have some of those roles involved as well, which you can see here. A project manager to manage the whole process. Business analyst that understands the need of a business. Solution architect in case of very complex solutions in which search is just a part of it. DevOps engineer to manage all the environments, and control vocabulary specialist, already talked about that. And UX developer, because that's what the user sees in the end, he interacts with the UI. So those are not full-time roles, but I would advise to have at least them involved in some way in this whole tuning exercise. We need essentials for project. Those speak for themselves, I would say, to documentation space, issue tracker, and having meeting schedule. We need a tuning environment. Now that is not a typical test environment. This is an environment that at least contains the full content set, because it's very hard to tune against a sample set. You need to have a full set, and also we need to have the freedom in order to do anything we like, because tuning touches all those different areas, and so anything can happen. So it must also be stable in the sense that if we share this with another group that does also crazy things there, it's kind of unreliable. So good to have this private tuning environment which we fully control, and we have all the flexibility, including all the content. Then we need something to analyze that. So analysis tools. You see the link below if you want to see a little bit more about what we did with analysis tools in another presentation. Important is that those judgment sets, that takes time in order to prepare. So that's kind of expensive. We ask our experts in order to create those and to maintain those. So if we start up, if we are becoming ready for tuning, that is one of the first things we ask a business to do. Please create those judgment sets. And that involves also a lot of guidance and explanation, because it's not that easy to create those. And then, if available, I would also advise to include in this whole mix customer feedback that already is there, like in the form of survey results or any forms, but also or interviews. But also just look at the logs. You can have a lot of information just by looking at the study and analyzing how the user behaves. So let's throw that into the mix and let's tune. So this is full operation mode, right? So it's a cyclic process. And let's say that we start with analyzing. So we have those logs available. We have this user feedback. Analysis is going to happen there. And also at the same time, we are running those judgment sets against the tuning environment. Now that will hopefully create a big list of problem spaces and issues that we want to address. And after a lot of analysis, you'll see that a couple of issues will look the same, and is actually caused by one single problem. So you can kind of categorize each of those, and also group those and sort them based on priority. So that's what I mean with categorizing those issues on top. Then, with the whole team, we're going to strategize improvements for each of those and categorize them as well, and think about how to make the situation better. In meeting schedules, we are discussing this with the whole team. So it's a group effort there. So tuning happens, like I said, could be in the search engine, content, vocabularies, product, features, or any of those at the same time. That is being implemented in the tuning environment to just run and see if it really did what we expect. And if it indeed did what we expect and the situation is better, then it's going to be pushed to production. And then the cycle continues. So this is not, it's a big cycle. There are smaller cycles in between. So you don't have to wait before something's put into production to do the next cycle of analysis. Also, it means that you can be active in multiple places at the same time in this circle. Okay, so then in maintenance mode, things don't change that much, actually. The intensity goes a bit down, and we can maybe do with less people. But like I said, we need to be sure here that we don't fall back into a regression. That's the thing that we want to prevent. So keep studying those logs, keep polling those users, and also, very important, keep those judgment sets up to date and run them in the tuning environment, just to be sure that you don't unexpectedly fall back into a less quality product. Okay, so in a large organization like Wolters Kluwer, it is very likely that there are multiple of those similar exercises going on at the same time. And now, if you recognize this, then I would say that's a good thing, because that means that the culture has kind of settled in already in your organization, and it's actually a sign of, for us, it was a sign that this is a successful approach, so that multiple groups are adopting that methodology. It also introduced new problems, because now we have a resourcing problem, especially resourcing of relevancy search engineers. And how do you manage that? So the way we kind of try to solve that is to train other relevancy engineers. So that was partially successful. You have to have this certain passion for it in order to go on and adopt it. But yeah, it's still an ongoing effort. Also, it introduces opportunities. So those teams can really learn from each other. And yeah, that's now new opportunities. And the way how we approached that in the first place was because I was basically involved in any of those, me and my colleague. So we could act as a messenger between the groups. Hey, we have learned what happens here. This could be interesting for you too. But that kind of shifted now towards something else. I'm more like facilitating, just bring the groups together and let them talk to each other instead of me being the messenger all the time. So, and that is that's interesting, because then what we actually do is organize those events where physically all those groups come together in the same room. They start talking to each other, and you see something happening then. That's interesting, because they share, of course, ideas with each other. They have the feeling they are not alone in solving those problems. They'll talk about, okay, how do you solve creating those judgment sets? How do you measure customer satisfaction? Even though the products are totally different, all those problems that they are facing are actually the same. So it really works there. You have this, and also what is interesting, that different groups start to combine their requirements, which make a stronger case for something to happen in the end. Because we are a separate team, the search team that facilitates each of those. Sometimes you have to make decisions which teams to help and which product to facilitate. But if they share their requirements, then there's a stronger case in order to help them with that. So, yeah, part of a relevancy engineer in a big organization means actually creating a community. Okay, a different slide. So in my free time, the little time that I've left, I have some woodworking projects. So that's I don't have that much time for family and also work. So but it's a really nice distraction from all the screen work. And so on the top you see this piece of kitchen furniture that I made, putting all our cooking books inside. And for that I needed to have a good plunge saw in order to make those straight cuts through plywood. And yeah, that helped me in order to create that piece of furniture on the top. And on the bottom you see this is a playhouse made for the kids. And in order to be able to build that, I needed to have this miter saw to make those perfectly 90 degrees cuts or 45 degrees cuts. And so, moral of the story, I like to brag about my woodworking projects. And, and also, without proper tools, I was never be able to build this. So, back on topic. Proper tools. This is the tool that we use for relevancy tuning. What we see here is homegrown. It's unfortunately not, or maybe not yet, open source. It's not up to me. I would be advocating for that. So let me explain a bit what happens here. We have a judgment set. And judgment set is a list of queries. For each query, the most ideal answers. And that's what you see on the left here. So all those queries. And the most ideal answers are the boxes in the first column. Then, if you run those queries, we have actual answers. And those actual answers is the second column. The difference between reality and expectation is expressed in all those colors. And the colors tell you something about whether the result is higher or lower than expected, and if it's on the first page or not. Basically, it's that. Also, NDCG, of course, is the main metric, which is the difference between two result sets. So we have two different metrics in order to see this, and also the color representation is a really nice way in order to quickly spot where the problem areas are in a big set of judgment queries. And if you want to, it's an analysis tool, so it's not just collecting metrics, it's also finding out if something is wrong with a certain query, what can be wrong. So some queries do not. If the more depressing the color is, the worse the query is. So usually you want to look at those in an early stage. So drilling down in the query actually means you have to look at explain information, which can be painful if you have to do that for a big list. Especially our explains are like that, big hairy pieces of text, and that really screams for visualization. And that's why we created this visualization piece of the explain. You can see it on the right side here. What you see here is the first 30 results, and analyzed by just looking at all those explains. And on top you see the score, the total score. Those are all the additive scores that are counted together. Then we see all the scores per term, scores per field. It's a bit sliced in a different way. And then all the multiplicative function queries that we have also applied, they need to go to their own graphs because you cannot add those to additive graphs. So they need to go to. But anyway, it's a very nice way in order to quickly scan through a query just to see. I don't even have to go to explain information to see where problems appear now. So, moral of the story again, surround yourself with good tools. It's just as woodworking, don't cut back onto quality tools. If you don't have them, invest in them to create them. Right? And here's an overview of all the tools that we try to combine in order to make a good decision about relevancy. We try to be more data-driven, right? So that's a kind of ongoing effort in order to insert more data in decision-making. And one of the data that we need to have, of course, is looking at user behavior. And so that's one of those areas here. Another source of metrics is looking at environments and the software that runs there, and so just like CPU and memory, of course, and performance. Also, like Solar produces a lot of analysis as well. I already talked about those judgment sets that we run. We can also run this automatically, so it doesn't have to be someone pressing the button, but it could be a scheduled task that collects this metric every X time. Could be every day, every week. And the fourth category is a set of tools that we're developing now in order to measure change. So it's different than the judgment set, which is kind of quality. That's good and bad. Change doesn't mean good and bad. It just means change. But change is very important in order to know whether it is expected or not. And what does change mean? Could mean, so given a set of queries, what are the different results per time interval, for example, between now and something in the past, or between environment A and environment B, or between two versions. And that can also be expressed in NDCG in the end. Well, while this number doesn't mean anything about good and bad, it just means that something is different. So also that can be automatically, and it is easier to run those tests than, because you don't need judgment sets for that. You only need queries, and that's easy. So all of this, we are combining in one big dashboard, which in the end is the main go-to place in order to find metrics to making decisions for relevancy. Okay, let's talk a bit about how you design a search solution inside a company like Wolters Kluwer, where we have dozens of different products with each of their own requirements. So what you could do is design custom solutions for each of them, but that obviously doesn't scale, and so it's not what we do in the end. So what the solution for this is to create generic, reusable, highly customizable and loosely coupled components that in the end we use in order to, let's say, compose a search solution by just plug and play each of those components and customize them. Right? So we took it even a step further, and that is to not install or plug and play components at different places, but instead creating this as a SaaS solution. So it is, we call it search as a service, obviously. And now we're kind of abstracting away with this the search for solution for search for the end products. They now have to deal with an API. And that helps very much, again, in scalability. So with this, we are really able to facilitate search for different products with different needs by using the same components in the end. And also, if you look clear, then a lot of those components here are usually part of the search engine itself. And they are now here outside of the search engine. So they are their own thing. Part of that is also due because after the fast to Solr migration, we learned to not to be too depending on the actual search technology. So hopefully we'll never have to do that again. But now we are on Solr, but you never know. So if that happens, then it is relatively easy. I have to see about that, but it's relatively easy to replace that search engine with something different, and the other components can still be in the same place. I'd like to zoom in a little bit more on the way how the query is being processed. Because that's very obviously, if you zoom in on that where customization is really needed for different products. So when a query comes in, it goes through a couple of stages before it gets actually to the search engine. So what first happens is that the query comes in, it has a certain syntax that the user is using, and that's being translated into an abstract object, an AST, abstract syntax tree. This is better suitable for analysis, right? And then that is actually what happens in the next stage. So the query analysis. Now this is a place where we have a couple of stages trying to detect whatever is there in this query. And when it is being detected, the tree is getting decorated or annotated with that discovery. Examples, finding out if there are any concepts in this query, and multi-term concepts. Maybe they are subject for synonym expansion in the end. Detecting patterns like dates or citations. Detecting if something is a stop word or not. Detecting if something should be treated as a filter or as a search term. Or even queries that are known before, so we know which documents need to be boosted for that. So all of these are kind of plug and playable little stages. So it's the same idea of the previous slide, but then in a smaller scale. And in fact, they are just it's either Java code, it's either a couple of regular expressions that are doing the matching, or vocabulary matches. Now, the interesting piece of vocabulary matches is that we use Solr in order to look up those vocabulary matches. And Solr is a very good tool in order to do those things. And vocabularies are indexed in Solr, a separate collection. Every line in a dictionary, so every item in the dictionary is its own Solr document there. And yeah, it's really working well. So we're using Solr in order to prepare the query going to Solr. So, okay, so let's say we have this tree decorated, discovered, it's very rich now, we know what happens inside. So the next stage is the query planning stage. And now the query starts to, the tree starts to change from shape. Here is where the business logic is being applied. And synonyms are actually expanded. So actual new nodes are being added there. Stop words are being moved. Things are being normalized. like filters are applied, synonyms could be expanded. Then it's time to make the final transition, which is the actual Solr syntax. And then we have actual search. So that's breaking down what happens on query side. Now it could be, you could easily do all of this in Solr itself, but we on purpose took it out of Solr. Because it's now more flexible, aside from the search engine technology. And also, one good reason is that since we have that many products and that many requirements, especially regarding to the different vocabularies that are used for each query, it is necessary to, for each query, determine which vocabulary to use for synonym expansion. Right? And if it is all inside the search engine, that's way harder to do. So, I'm ready at the last slide then. Lessons learned, quality means more money. Have a good plan available that really increases the confidence that you would build. Get involved early. Work in a team with multiple disciplines. You cannot never do this alone. Create a community. Surround yourself with very good tools. And design a generic reusable. And in the end, don't stop. But that's actually what I'm going to do. So I'm stopping now. So I think that leaves a lot of time for questions. Thanks.
Any questions?
Thank you, Tom. Fascinating talk. So on the last slide, on the query parser pipeline, that's happening all outside of Solr, right? If I understood properly.
Yes.
And the last stage when you produce the Q equal, what is that? Is that a Lucene query that somehow you provide to Solr?
Exactly. Yeah, I'd like to tell more. Yeah.
I mean, the Lucene query is a Java object, so how do you pass that on to Solr?
This is actually not a Lucene query, it's an Edis Max query. So it's really a Solr query, right? So, but in the end, it's just using the Solr API in order to construct those queries, and yeah, not something special there.
In an earlier slide, you showed an example of the various teams communicating with each other as a network, and then you showed. So if you can go back to that.
Okay.
Yeah, right
This
there.
one.
Right. So this to me speaks to a model where you have a federated group of teams that are working on improving search in separate teams.
Yes.
And then later in the presentation, you talked about reusable components, which to me suggests reuse of software. Can you talk about how you manage the governance or the sharing of components, updating shared components, given distributed teams? What do the local teams have ownership over versus do you maintain a central team to manage some of the shared components? How do you negotiate that split?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, Wolters Kluwer is going through this transition of getting more centralized. So these individual teams usually had their own solution from the beginning. Now that is kind of shifting. So the way how it's being set up is that we have this centralized organization that is actually taking over the different solutions for each product. And that is what we're facilitating. So especially the search piece is what is getting centralized. Now there's kind of a sliding, let's say, scale about where the priority stops, because I think that the product owners still have a big say in the way how the UI is, for example, being created. The more, let's say, low level you go, the more centralized it gets. Especially search is very low level in that sense. We are basically owning, as that centralized group, the final solution of each product. Is that kind of answering your question? Maybe not.
The description of a transition provides a lot more clarity. So I guess what I'm getting at, it sounds like you have a model where you had lots of federated teams working on search or trying to optimize search in an independent way,
Yes,
but moving to a model of shared components.
exactly.
So then I'm trying to get my head around where the end state is. Is the end state 50% of your search engineers are distributed and 50% are centralized? Are you 80-20? And then specifically, where do you decide where to make the cuts? So if you think of all the components, you have the back-end query parsing, you have the core relevance, you have highlighting, you have search features.
Yeah.
Do you centralize across all of those, or do you say certain components should be part of a central team?
Yeah, certain component. I would say almost the complete search experience is part of that central team. Yeah, but yeah, it's kind of hard to say what makes someone a search expert. So is that someone that does this full time or has just knowledge about it? So we have still search experts in our, let's say, different groups here that are decentralized. They are not kind of architecting this anymore, but they are involved in decision making, right? So they own together the final solution because we are not telling them what to do, but they are telling basically us what to do, or we do this kind of in a shared collaboration.
Your internal customers for localized solutions, but the engineering is still centralized.
The engineering is centralized, but it's a group effort between the different teams that they are finally coming with requirements, and they have their search experts on board. The question is that a search expert is just someone that knows search quite good, right? So it's not that he is steering the wheel himself, but he is kind of helping us and finalizing the requirements. Right.
Bertrand has another question, but Tito and Bertrand have owned the question session so far, so I'm going to ask if anybody else has any.
Thanks. So what you've shown us it's fantastic. It's a lot of investment from your company in search to be able to do this. It's premised on at the beginning you had a slide that says high search quality equals money.
Yes.
Is that like how do you make that case to the folks that have the money?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of patience, right? So what we did is starting small. This tuning exercise just started at one single product, and at some point we were successful in that. We could really prove that all the effort that we put in that was actually making those customers happy. In the end, we had a little crisis in the beginning, but that crisis went away because of this. So we had a success story to tell. Now that is very convincing if you go to the next product and want to say, hey, we have this done at the other place. So the more you grow, the more evidence we have in the past, that is kind of the convincing story that you have. But it's very hard to tell if you invest this amount of money, this is what you get out. I mean, how do you know? Because it's not just search in the end that drives the product value. There's UI involved, there are other features not search related, and they all go together, they don't stand still. So.
Any other questions?